Courtney, that was bloody fantastic.
Thank you.
Let me tell you something, Courtney. Something has changed in you. Trust me. In the time you were on the show last year to now, your interaction with the audience, the confidence. I think this has been my favorite performance of you.
There is a moment in television history that very few people who witnessed it will ever forget. A 13-year-old girl walked onto the America's Got Talent stage in 2018, small, quiet, visibly nervous. And within seconds of opening her mouth, she rearranged the emotional landscape of everyone in that room. The judges shifted in their seats. The audience rose to its feet. And Simon Cowell, a man who has spent decades building a reputation as the most unshakable, unimpressed, and emotionally armored figure in the entertainment industry, sat frozen, his poker face cracking under the weight of something he had not expected to feel. That girl was Courtney Hadwin. And what happened next, what Simon did with that moment, what the industry did with that girl, and what Courtney eventually had to do to save herself, is one of the most important stories in modern pop culture. Not because it ends in triumph on a grand stage, but because it ends in something rarer. A young woman reclaiming her own voice after the industry tried to replace it with something more sellable. This is that story, and it begins, as so many music industry cautionary tales do, with a standing ovation. Courtney Hadwin was born on July 6, 2004, in Heselden, a small, former mining village tucked near Hartlepool in County Durham, in the northeast of England. She grew up in a tight-knit working-class family, her parents Paul and Anne-Marie, and her younger siblings Paul and Melissa. There was nothing about the village, the circumstances, or the landscape that would make you predict what came next. Music found Courtney early, the way it finds all great singers, not through formal instruction first, but through instinct. She hummed and sang at home as a small child. She drifted into musical theater. She started covering songs and posting them online before she fully understood what any of it meant. By her own account, she began singing properly around age 9 or 10. By 11, she was performing at a lunchtime open mic event at her school, singing Say Something by A Great Big World and Christina Aguilera. Someone filmed it. Someone shared it. And within hours, people in her community couldn't stop talking about the girl with a voice that sounded decades older than her years. That video going locally viral was the spark that lit everything else. Classmates who had no idea what was living inside their quiet schoolmate were suddenly urging her to pursue it seriously. And she did. She buskied in local spaces to help cover the cost of singing lessons. She attended multiple vocal academies, Shotton Hall Theater School, Peanuts Master Classes, Kate Sir School of Music, and Vocal Ovation by Julie Miles. Her grandfather later described watching her stand on street corners, collecting loose change, not for herself, but to help pay for petrol so the family could drive her to auditions. She competed at Teen Star UK in Newcastle at age 11, reaching the grand final with a rendition of Bob Dylan's Make You Feel My Love. At 12, she won Hartlepool's Performer of the Year award. She opened for Sister Sledge at the South Tyneside Festival in front of over 18,000 people. She appeared on The Voice Kids UK, where a fiery audition of Tina Turner's Nutbush City Limits earned her a spot on Danny Jones's team and carried her all the way to the final. All of this before she was a teenager by any cultural definition. By the time she stood in the wings of the America's Got Talent stage in 2018, Courtney Hadwin had already lived an entire career's worth of experience. She just didn't know yet what the world was about to ask her to do with it. The producers of America's Got Talent Season 13 had reportedly sought out international talent when they invited Courtney to audition. What they got was something they almost certainly hadn't fully prepared for. She walked out looking exactly like what she was, a shy, quietly overwhelmed 13-year-old from a small English village. She answered the judges' questions in a near whisper. She fidgeted slightly, and then Otis Redding's Hard to Handle began. What came out of her was not the voice of a child. It was raw, gritty, raspy, and enormous. A voice that seemed to carry the emotional residue of a life far longer than 13 years. As she transformed on stage, her body language shifting from anxious stillness to wild, uninhibited energy, The audience went from polite anticipation to complete eruption. Howie Mandel hit the golden buzzer almost immediately, sending golden confetti raining down and Courtney straight through to the live shows. He told her that her voice belonged to a completely different era, that she reminded him of Janis Joplin, one of the defining voices in the history of rock and blues. And Simon? Simon sat still. Then he leaned back, and then he said the words that became the quote everyone repeated for weeks afterward. You were this shy little thing when you came out. You sing, and you're like a lion. The man who never cries, who has watched thousands of acts across decades of televised competition, who built his entire public identity on controlled indifference, looked genuinely moved. The audition video spread across the internet at extraordinary speed. Within days, it had been viewed tens of millions of times. Within weeks, the number would climb past 300 million. Headlines across the English-speaking world announced the arrival of a generational talent. Courtney was called the British soul sensation, the next Janis Joplin, a 13-year-old singing like a legend. And though she ultimately finished 6th in the competition, a result that surprised many who had expected her to win, she left with something more valuable than a trophy: the attention of the entire music industry, and specifically the attention of Simon Cowell. Shortly after the 2018 live shows concluded, Simon signed Courtney to Psycho Music, his record label, in partnership with Arista Records. She was 14 years old. She described the deal as a dream come true. She couldn't have known yet what the dream was going to cost her. The music industry is not designed for children. It is barely designed for adults. It is a machine built to extract product, and it runs on timelines, budgets, and market positioning, not on the emotional maturity of the artist being processed by it. At 14, Courtney entered that machine at full speed. Almost immediately, her life became a rotating schedule of recording sessions, promotional appearances, transatlantic flights, and meetings with executives who had very specific ideas about who she should be. A typical week might begin with breakfast at home in County Durham, a flight to the United States by evening, and a long studio session with producers pitching sounds and hooks she had no particular connection to. She was expected to write and record original material on tight deadlines. She was expected to stay media ready. She was expected to perform, and not just once, but consistently, reliably, professionally. She was 14. In later interviews, Courtney was candid about the emotional reality of that period. She described feeling that people around me were telling me what I should sound like and who I should be. She described studio sessions where her own creative instincts were overridden by industry voices, steering her toward a polished pop-soul crossover sound, a sound that clashed with the rawness that had made her remarkable in the first place. She described writing sessions where she had to bend her lyrics to themes or emotional registers that didn't feel true to her own experience. The comparisons to Janis Joplin, which had felt like the highest possible compliment when Howie Mandel made them on the AGT stage, became, in the context of the label, something closer to a cage. She was being asked to embody a legend rather than discover herself. She was being asked to arrive at artistic identity before she had finished growing into her own skin. Behind the scenes, the strain began to show. Courtney later described experiencing real mental exhaustion, not just tiredness, but the kind of deep disorientation that comes from having your sense of self eroded by relentless external expectation. She felt isolated, surrounded by industry professionals, traveling between continents, missing home, missing the simple, grounded reality of Heselden. The fan messages were loving and enthusiastic. The internal experience was something else entirely. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, she began to withdraw. Social media posts became less frequent. Mainstream media appearances dwindled. Fans began to notice and worry. Speculation filled the silence. Was she ill? Had something happened? Where had Courtney gone? She was still there. She was just trying to find a way back to herself. What happened next is perhaps the most instructive part of the story. Not for what occurred, but for what didn't. Simon Cowell moved on, as he always does. The next season of America's Got Talent began. The next wave of talent came through. Simon returned to his chair, his sharp tongue, his brilliant instinct for spectacle. Courtney's name faded from his public narrative. There were no statements about her struggles, no acknowledgement of the weight she was carrying, no visible reflection on what it meant to sign a 14-year-old to a major label contract and place her inside an industrial machine built for grown adults. To be fair to Simon, he is a businessman first. He spots talent. He makes deals. He moves forward. That is the job, and he does it extraordinarily well. He was never presented to Courtney as a mentor. He was the executive who cast her, signed her, and announced the deal. What happened after that announcement was, in the logic of the industry, someone else's department. But that absence, the silence that followed the fanfare, was felt by Courtney, by the fans watching, by anyone paying close enough attention to notice the gap between the glittering launch and the quiet, painful aftermath. It took years, and it took Courtney walking away from the label entirely, taking her career into her own hands, working with independent producers, including Grammy-winning producer Kevin Bowe, known for his collaborations with Etta James and Joe Cocker, before the story began to shift in a new direction. By 2025, Courtney Hadwin had become someone new. She had returned to the United Kingdom. She was living in County Durham again, close to the Northern English roots that had always kept her grounded. She had signed with a new management team, Total Artist Management, under Oliver Mojita, after departing her previous management citing creative differences. And she was working on music that, for the first time in her professional life, sounded entirely like her. Working with Kevin Bowe, she wrote and recorded a body of work that stripped away the polished pop soul gloss and replaced it with something raw, confessional, and emotionally courageous. Songs like Monsters, You Only Love Me When I Lie, Breakable, and That Girl Don't Live Here explored themes of vulnerability, identity, anger, and resilience. Themes drawn directly from her own experience of being swallowed by an industry that didn't know how to hold a teenager carefully. Her debut album, Little Miss Jagged, was slated for release in September 2025. Reviewers and fans who had followed her journey from the beginning described it as her most personally powerful work. Music that carried, as one journalist put it, the tension of hidden pain and the courage to finally speak it out loud. A stripped-down, micless performance of You Only Love Me When I Lie circulated widely online and left viewers breathless. Critics wrote that she sounded like thunder, like fire, like someone who had been through something real and survived it. In interviews, Courtney was unusually open about everything she had been through. She talked about burnout, about loss of control, about the pressure of performing before she was emotionally ready, about the long, quiet process of reclaiming her identity after years of being told who to be. Now I know who I am as an artist, she said. It was not a boast. It was simply the statement of someone who had done the hard work of figuring it out. She performed at Carnegie Hall in April 2024, handpicked by legendary music executive Clive Davis to open a gala with a Janis Joplin tribute. Industry veterans who had watched Joplin perform were in the room, and Courtney held the stage. And then came the moment that sparked the most conversation. In late 2024 and into 2025, several viral clips began circulating online. Retrospective segments and alleged interview footage in which Simon Cowell appeared to break from his characteristic composure when the subject of Courtney Hadwin came up. According to those clips, he paused mid-sentence in an uncharacteristic way. He sighed, and he reportedly said, "We expected too much too soon." And then, quietly, "She was a kid. I think we failed her." Those watching said his voice cracked, that his composure wavered in a way that millions of viewers had never seen from him before. That for just a moment, the unflappable judge looked like a man sitting with something heavy and long unexamined. It is worth being honest here. Those specific clips have not been confirmed by mainstream journalists or major outlets at the time of this writing. The direct quotes have not been independently verified. But the emotional truth they point to, the idea of Simon Cowell finally reckoning with what the system did to a young girl whose talent he genuinely recognized and whose vulnerability he may not have fully accounted for. That truth resonates because it mirrors what Courtney herself has described living through. Even if Simon never said those exact words, The question they raise is real. What is the responsibility of a powerful industry gatekeeper when they open a door for a child? What does it mean to sign a 14-year-old and hand her to a machine? And what does it look like when that gatekeeper eventually, publicly or privately, sits with the answer? Courtney Hadwin is 20 years old. She has over 1 million followers across TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. She is deeply engaged with her audience, not for promotion, but for connection. She hosts Q&A sessions. She posts studio snippets and behind-the-scenes moments from her creative process. She talks openly about mental health, about therapy, about setting boundaries, about what it means to choose the process over the performance. She has played venues across the UK and Europe. She is planning US tour dates. She is booking shows with a team that believes in her vision rather than overriding it. And she is writing. Every day, by her own account, in quiet moments at home, her laptop open, her thoughts lining up into verses that belong entirely to her. The entertainment industry is not designed to protect children. It is designed to identify value and extract it. Courtney Hadwin was not the first young artist swallowed by that reality, and she will not be the last. But what she has done, what she is still doing, is extraordinary precisely because it is so unglamorous. She did not survive by becoming harder or more cynical. She survived by becoming more honest, more herself, more Courtney. Simon Cowell spotted a lion on that stage in 2018. The industry spent years trying to turn it into something tamer. And the lion eventually walked back into its own territory and learned to roar on its own terms. If there are tears in this story, they are not tears of tragedy. They're the kind that come when something lost is finally, painfully, beautifully